With so many RPGs played, it's a given that a few of them just won't make the grade. While I wouldn't consider all of these games to be bad, in some cases the opposite, I do see them as a letdown based upon what I was expecting. Here are 5 JRPGs that disappointed me in 2023. And we're starting with Fire Emblem Engage that came out right near the beginning of the year. Engage sees you take the role as the divine dragon, a worship deity that has been asleep for 1,000 years. When you wake up, you have lost your memory and eventually go on a grand journey with your devoted followers. Understandably, Engage was hyped to the rafters after the success of Free Houses. There were leaks on the pro tags and the gameplay mechanics were known well before it was due. Since it released though, the reception of it has been mixed to say the least, and I completely understand why. I didn't dislike Engage, in fact I enjoyed it in parts, hence why I finished the game. I abandon any JRPG that isn't fun to play and I stick to that religiously. So I can't in good faith say Fire Emblem Engage is a bad game, because it's not. But it does present a dilemma to the player. If you value gameplay, you'll be fine. The gameplay in Engage is the best I've seen thus far. The use of additional attacks and the ability to disarm opponents are great additions in of themselves, but what allows it to stand above the rest is the use of the emblems. Vessels that hold the spirits of recognisable heroes from the previous games. They each have their own skills, abilities, and they can be equipped to pretty much anyone, so you can play however you want. There's a staggering amount of flexibility on offer, along with a central hub called the Somnial where you can mix and match to your heart's content. The Somnial is also where all of the other characters gather, and again I really like the cast in Engage. I found myself far more invested in their stories than I thought I'd be. Exaggerated caricatures that are so on the nose they become enjoyable. So for all intents, Engage has many strong points. The same cannot be said of its story though, which I still maintain to this day is not good. For a series that is capable of so much more from a narrative standpoint, Engage's story was a massive letdown. There are inconsistencies with cutscenes that show early on suggesting that it is a window to the future of some kind, but you never see it again. I wasn't a fan of being the divine dragon where everyone showered me with praise for merely existing, and it's heavily reliant on certain relationships that just aren't given enough time to develop. But the biggest problem I had with Engage's story is that it lacked identity. It was trying to give us a serious story but also make it more kid-friendly at the same time. You can certainly have humour in a serious story, or vice versa. Think Resident Evil 4 for example with Leon's quips.
From the great Lord Sadler. I've been expecting you, my brethrens.
No thanks, bro.
But at the end of the day, you still need to maintain a clear focus on one or the other. Engage muddied the waters by having too much of each, and it resulted in something that doesn't please either side. What was more of a letdown to me is that I know Fire Emblem as a series can nail its story. I still remember so many moments from Radiant Dawn and Awakening despite playing them years ago. The same cannot be said with Engage. I definitely echo the sentiment that Engage was a great game in terms of its gameplay and characters, its gameplay in particular being the high point, but it ended up being a disappointing experience overall because of the lackluster narrative, and as a story over gameplay enthusiast, it became one of my biggest letdowns of 2023. Up next is the most recent release in the Neptunia series as of recording, in Sisters vs Sisters. As my first game in the series, I was hoping it would take me down the rabbit hole to a new Shangri-La, but in the end I was just booted back out by the bunny itself. I can say with confidence that after playing Sisters vs Sisters, I have no intention of playing any other Neptunia game for a long time, and I think it, along with Refrain Chord, reaffirmed to me that I'm just not a fan of Idea Factory games. While Refrain Chord also failed to deliver this year, hence why I abandoned that too within 10 hours, I at least had a hunch that I wasn't going to latch onto it due to my time with the original Fairy Fencer, which was fine but never really went beyond that. Sisters vs Sisters though was not only a blank slate but also the biggest series that Idea Factory hold on to, a multimedia franchise, so if this one couldn't grab me, then what hope does anything else? I gave this game ample time to hook me in, 12 hours of gameplay, which is more than I normally allow if a game doesn't click. But the more I played, the more I started to realise that this just wasn't going to be for me. Don't get me wrong, I can see why people enjoy it. Unlike games like Agarest or Star Ocean Integrity and Faithlessness, which were completely irredeemable in my eyes, there were a few moments that I had a good time with, mostly related to the diverse cast of characters and its wacky premise. But characters can only take a game so far, and there were too many blemishes upon the canvas that I just couldn't ignore. First of all, this game is not for newcomers, despite being advertised as such. Even as a spin-off, it has a bunch of references to what I assume are earlier games, and the standalone story didn't do enough to get me invested. I feel that if I had a prior connection to these characters, I might have latched onto it more, but alas, I didn't. Secondly, disc creation is a big part of progression in this game, and it costs a fair amount of resources to do so. The issue is that the results of said disc creation are random, which can double your time doing menial tasks till you get what you need. That was giving me Agarest vibes, and I hate it. And last of all, the combat. Without question, one of the most clunky action RPGs I've ever played. Not to mention, it commits the cardinal sin of this genre in that it feels sluggish and unresponsive at many points. For example, that RNG disc creation we mentioned earlier is the only way to cancel combos, at least from the 12 hours I played, which is what I consider to be a core part of this genre of gameplay. Otherwise, animations take way too long, frame data feels inconsistent, and the actual dungeons themselves are so uninspired. Hallways where you find a switch, open a door, and then rinse and repeat till you get to the end where you fight against a reskinned enemy with a larger health pool. Normally, gameplay isn't the element that stops me playing, but I at least need other points of the game to hold it up and keep me engaged. Sisters vs. Sisters did not have that. The third on the list is a remaster of a PS2 Vanillaware title in GrimGrimoire once more. I forgot that I even played it. As I was looking through my RPG lists this year, compiling all the games I played, my eyes stuck on this one and I had that sudden realisation of, oh yeah, I did play that. Again, GrimGrimoire is another one of those titles that isn't bad per se, but it does have a niche audience. It's a gamble, ultimately. And joke's on me, I lost out this time around. I had high hopes for this game. I knew it wasn't going to be similar to Aegis Rim, but Vanillaware's name was enough to get me invested before its release. After 10 hours though, I knew it wasn't going to be for me, and I feel like a lot of others forgot it as well, as it received very little fanfare upon release. In GrimGrimoire, you play as Lilith Barn, who has arrived at the Silver Star Tower to learn about magecraft. As Harry Potter has taught us, magical educational institutions are oft interwoven with danger, from traps to supernatural entities that roam the halls. As such, Lilith is told not to roam the tower at night. Even during the day though, there's plenty of unsettling stuff around the tower, like faculty members that are a bit eccentric, and phenomena that is clearly not of the normal world. It makes sense though, and I really like this part of the game. It's a magical tower. Of course it's going to be a bit off its hinges inside, and the artwork of Vanillaware, which is pretty much trademarked at this point, brings it to life even more. The actual character designs and backgrounds look really good. The sound design is fairly strong too, though I do think the dialogue is a bit stiff at points, though you can put that down as it being a product of its time. As for gameplay though, it's advertised as a real-time strategy title when in reality it's more a tower defense game. There's definitely the vibes of a Red Alert or StarCraft in the make of GrimGrimoire. In fact, StarCraft was the inspiration for this game, and you can definitely see that, but I don't think it measures up to its inspiration. Gameplay takes place on a 2D plane, and Lilith can call on a number of minions to do battle, each with their own strengths and weaknesses, and they're split into separate schools. Lilith uses grimoires to summon these familiars, which each have their own skill trees tied to them, allowing for tangible progression throughout. The missions generally boil down to survive waves of enemies or destroy the enemy's mana fonts. Now while the gameplay is fine, I think it's hampered by two things. Initially, the map design is too similar, which is more a product of its setting than anything else. You can't really have diverse environments when the whole game takes place in a massive vertical tower. Either way, you have magic, so surely you can do a bit more there. And secondly, if you've played games like Red Alert 2 or StarCraft 2, then GrimGrimoire just comes up short when making comparisons. It's a competent strategy game, but it doesn't match up to other contemporaries. My biggest disappointment though came in its story once again. GrimGrimoire operates on a 5-day cycle, all centered around an evil wizard who is attempting to take the Philosopher's Stone for himself. As with many games that operate on loops like this, the game is all about discovering new information in each subsequent jump back to eventually find a way to stop it. Now while the actual method is sound, it's just not executed well enough. there's something missing in its presentation that makes the story unengaging at points. It might be the voice acting, it might be the dialogue, or it might be its odd pacing. Heck, it could be a mix of all three. I couldn't really pinpoint it. But what I do know is that by the third loop, I was done, and the gameplay didn't do enough to keep me invested. It is a shame, and I do hope that Unicorn Overlord doesn't fall into this same category come next year. Now, talking about loops, it's time to move on to what is without question the most disappointing game I played this year, which hurts even more when it was one of my most anticipated titles of 2023. I'm sure some of you know it, it's Loop 8 Summer of Gods. Now, at the beginning of the video I did say that I don't consider every game on this list to be bad, just that I expected more from them. That does not apply to Loop 8. While I did have expectations of it, it is a bad game, and I have no reservation in saying that. The issue with Loop 8 is that it has characteristics of other genres like dating sims, RPGs and visual novels, but it combines them so haphazardly it becomes a pile of uninspired sludge by the end. A classic case of a premise sounding great on paper, but hampered by poor execution. Loop 8 is set in a world reminiscent of 1980s Japan, where humanity has been forced to the brink of extinction by the Kegai, which are manifestations of natural disasters like floods, infernos and droughts. Humanity escaped space and our protag Nini has lived there his whole life. However, due to a Kegai attack on the colony, he now has to come down to Earth and live in the coastal town of Ashihara. He moves in with his cousin, and now lives out a typical summer to build his relationships with the residents of the town who will aid him in the coming battles. The game operates in an endless August, where Nini is attempting to break fate and end the loop. During this time, several Kegai bosses will invade the town, and it's up to Nini along with his pals to stop them. Your main goal during these periods of downtime, which equate to around 5 days each, is to build your relationships enough with the other characters so that when the Kegai attacks and you need to fight, you are strong enough to defeat them. The combat itself, though, much like the rest of the game, leaves a lot to be desired. While it looks like a typical turn-based system, it's actually limited in that you only get control of Nini, the other two act autonomously. But because of the makeup of the social sim element, which ultimately gives you your stats like energy and HP, the best tactic you can employ in Loop 8 is always the same, no matter what enemy you face. Choose your best ability 5 to 6 times and hope you win. Now, with that in mind, you will die a few times. In fact, the game requires you to die once to demonstrate the looping mechanic. The idea is that each subsequent loop will make you stronger, meaning you can overcome the later bosses. By the third loop, you generally have everything you need to see it through to the end. However, the way it is implemented makes me think that the development team either didn't have the talent, or they just genuinely hated the people who were going to buy their game. A loop back resets everything, with the exceptions of blessings that function as permanent stat increases. But everything else, relationships, dialogue and events, go back to zero. The problem though, is that it's missing so many essential features for a game like this, like, I don't know, a way to skip dialogue on the PC version like visual novels have. Nope, they expect you to view all of these events again because, well, your time isn't that important. And what's worse is that the gameplay loop is easily one of the worst I have ever experienced. I am not exaggerating, 90% of the time you are talking to other characters who have the same options attached to them and the same canned responses. There is no variation to their responses, no change in the way the relationships develop, it's all the same, and it becomes mind-numbing to even partake in. Not to mention it's just not finished. There are mechanics that are meaningless, like stat increases given to characters who do not fight with you. Even so, even if it was given that time to iron out the issues, I'm convinced the game would still be bad because the whole premise, the whole makeup of the game was flawed anyway. I said it before and I'll say it again. The development team were not talented enough to deliver on their ultimate goal. It's so far off what they initially promised that it's difficult to even see what their vision was in the first place. It's not worth your money, it's not worth your time, it's not even a game you can laugh at. The biggest sin this game commits is that it functions. It's not a letdown because it's a broken mess. It's a letdown because it's a fully functioning game that somehow manages to be the RPG equivalent of watching paint dry. It has meaningless mechanics for sure, but it still works. You can actually finish it without glitches galore hampering your playthrough, which is what I did. I spite finished it to see if there was anything to salvage. That has got to be the most egregious part. Loop 8 can't even fall back on the excuse of, oh well, it might have been awesome if the developers had more time. No, it was just done from the start. It's better off forgotten, don't bother, not even out of morbid curiosity. The last game on this list is going to be a game I finished quite recently, once again a title that I had high expectations for, in Crymachina. I kept up to date with Crymachina as soon as that first announcement went out. I was watching trailers, interviews, everything. I was actually really looking forward to it, and everything looked great. And while Crymachina isn't bad like Loop 8 was, I couldn't help but feel that it should have been far more than it eventually became. Crymachina's biggest issue is that it's a lot of style but little substance. The setting is thousands of years following the extinction of humanity. Humans have been wiped out by a combination of disease and war, but before this came to its apex, a mothership called Eden was launched into space which had the sole purpose of bringing humanity back. On this ship exists control systems that will enact this, along with 8 Deus Ex Machina that preside over various functions of the ship itself. It's here where we're introduced to the game's protagonist Leben, who is awoken by one such Deus Ex Machina in Anoa, and a host of other characters as they look to discover the meaning of being a real human. Now, the first red flag I had for Crymachina actually came 3 months before the game even released. I was invited to an event in London to get an early hands-on impression on some games by NIS America. This event had 5 games present: Disgaea 7, Monochrome Mobius, Mile Kingdom Chronicles, Nayata Boundless Trails, and lastly Crymachina. The only game I was interested in was Crymachina. I had already played Nayata and Monochrome Mobius, and I didn't care much for Disgaea 7 nor Mile Kingdom Chronicles. Even so, I pretty much had to play all of the other ones before I even got a chance to play the game I came for. It was like they actively wanted to keep me away from it. When I finally did get to it, the session equated to around 30 minutes, with 20 of those taken up by the story. Only after playing it do I now know why that session was so short. Because if they had given me an hour, I would have very quickly pieced together how rigid its gameplay loop really was. Crymachina goes like this. You go into a stage which equates to a hallway most of the time. There are branching paths to optional bosses at certain junctures, but they're what I consider to be fake branches because they often lead to enemies you don't have a chance of beating anyway at that point in the game. You get to the end, fight a boss, see a cutscene, Inoa takes over a gateway, you go back to the Imitation Garden and see another cutscene, you go to the Tea Party events, watch some dialogue play out, level up, equip your items, and then go to the next stage. Rinse and repeat until you finish the game. It's so by the numbers, which is disappointing when you consider that it actually has some really cool ideas in there. I like the art direction of the characters themselves, it's anything but generic, that's for sure. I think the actual levels themselves, while they aren't too impressive in terms of structure, look amazing. They really nailed the scale in this game. The OST is strong, it melds seamlessly with that feeling of the emptiness of space, while also providing the beats for a fast-paced action RPG. And I also think the ending's done fairly well. In fact, the story overall is pretty good. Not amazing, but good. It sort of goes for a fourth wall break at the end that actually makes sense. I wish there were more moments like that. The developers clearly had an idea and message in mind, which they sometimes manage to deliver. Alas though, most of it is just shallow. The pre-rendered cutscenes, for example, look brilliant, but there's so little of them and they often repeat as well. The Imitation Garden, which was billed as a key part of the game, boils down to nothing more than a glorified menu. And then there's the combat. This part here is the perfect representation of what Crymachina actually is. It looks really good, but when you actually have that controller in hand, you'll quickly realise that the depth of the combat is minimal. Referencing a 360 controller, every character has a standard combo mapped to the X button. A is jump, right trigger is dodge, the Y button is your launch and spike ability, and a finishing move is mapped to a combination of buttons. Inoa can also assist from the sidelines with abilities to enhance the fighter or damage enemies herself mapped to the left trigger. Certainly there's plenty of options there. The issue with this though is that it never changes. The characters don't learn any new abilities over the course of the game. What you start with is what you end with. The only thing that kind of changes are the auxiliaries that you can equip and activate with the bumpers, which each have their own abilities tied to them. Ultimately though, they all feel similar, either damaging enemies or applying debuffs in a radius. I would have liked a little bit more creativity with them, like maybe incorporating them into certain combos and the like, giving them some real tangible benefit to actually finding these better versions of your auxiliaries. But they suffer from that same shallow feel as the rest of the combat. So really, there's no meaningful sense of progression there, and there's only so much that a pretty battle system can do. It doesn't help as well that the strategy to take out enemies is near on always the same. Break their posture, launch them, spike them, and then finishing move. And that's what it comes down to. Crymachina has a pretty face, but the personality of a limp noodle. You could argue that the low budget played a part there, but that just comes down to poor planning. Regardless of budget, you need to take what you have and equally tailor each area to make a satisfying experience overall. Many developers have to contend with that and succeed. In Furio's case though, they put all their eggs in one basket to make the surface look pristine and came up short in many other areas that were not easily seen. Like I say, it's not bad, it's just adequate. And if you like action RPGs, you'll get some fun out of it, but it is certainly limited. Add on to it that it's quite a short game at around 12 hours for the main story, which I think works in its favour to be honest, as it was getting stale by the end, and it ultimately became a letdown come the end. Thank you for watching this video. If you liked it, please like and subscribe for more JRPG content, and consider joining my Patreon if you're interested. Peace.